1. I moved abroad for work some years ago. I've had a variety of housemates during this time. Some were great, some were okay, and a few bad apples. My most recent flatmate, however, was like nothing I'd ever experienced. Penny. She had posted an ad looking for female working flatmates and lived in a luxury apartment. I live in a developing country in Asia, in its capital city, which is notorious for its difficult housing market, among many other things. It is not advisable for girls to live alone as a safety precaution. Also factor in that I'm alone in this country and rely heavily on a secure and comfortable living situation. Back to the story. I responded to Penny's advert looking for flatmates for sublet and arranged to see the place. It was a nice apartment with a reasonable rental price. Penny seemed nice enough. She said she was a lawyer and was looking for non-intrusive and responsible people to live with. I was looking for the same and thought it was a great place. I took the room and moved in the following month. Penny had some issues with another flatmate, which culminated in Penny locking the girl outside of our apartment and police being called. The departed flatmate told me that Penny would randomly text her abuse in the middle of the night, with the strangest insults. Things like, "You have crap taste and are so old, honey," and "My dog has more talent than you." Alarm bells were ringing, but I believed Penny when she told me the girl had not paid rent and was threatening to ransack the place. Plus, I had nowhere to go, as I had secured this room already. So I am living alone with Penny and a 20-year-old girl who had been employed by Penny's family to live with their daughter as a maid. The first week was fine. I realized, however, that Penny wasn't a lawyer and that she was actually unemployed. She would lie about going to work, how her day was, and what she ate during her lunch break at this non-existent job. I knew she was lying because the maid told me that Penny was strange and never left the apartment. I let it go, figured that she may be embarrassed of being unemployed. Penny had no idea I could communicate with the maid, as she was unaware I could speak the local language. When I found out the maid was completely illiterate, I told Penny I'd be teaching her how to read. Penny told me that there was no point because the maid wouldn't be interested, as poor people supposedly have no respect for education, and to not teach her anything because being literate wouldn't improve her life anyway. Actually, the maid was interested in learning to read, and I started to teach her. The maid wanted this to be kept secret and hid her notebook and pen during the day inside a box. I strongly believe Penny wanted to keep her illiterate, as she wanted her to be as vulnerable as possible. The maid had left school at 7 years old and had been working full-time since the age of 12, which Penny thought was great, as she learned how to cook very well. In the third week, crazy started. Penny presented me with a food bill, saying she'd ordered $300 worth of food for us. This was untrue, and I said I wouldn't be paying her. A weekly shop here is around $15. She would also hang around outside my room, wanting to talk before I left for work in the mornings, and then do the same in the evenings. I thought she was a lonely girl and felt sorry for her. She'd literally follow me to my bedroom door and keep talking until it was shut in her face. She talked to me for around 40 minutes at a time, uninterrupted, as if she was talking to herself. I could rarely get a word in. She appeared very unaware of social etiquette, and thought it normal to have a conversation where she was the only one speaking to the point of breathlessness. She texted me while I was at work, saying things like, "We need to talk this evening," about apartment stuff. One day, we had a drink, and she told me many things. That she was extremely academically gifted, had traveled the world, was related to the royal family, had a wardrobe worth thousands, and also that her boyfriend had died last year. I found out her ex-boyfriend was actually alive, but figured this was her way of dealing with a bad breakup. The rest of her story were lies. Actually, 90% of what she'd say was untrue. She'd lie about trivial things, which convinced me she had a personality disorder. I'd come back from work and she'd tell me that she'd arrived 1 hour before me and was having a nap, even though she just spent the whole day asleep after taking various substances. Penny's mother often rang the maid. Penny's family lived in a city a few hours away. To find out what Penny was doing, and she'd send Penny's cousin round every few weeks to check on her. During this time, Penny would also lie to them that she had a job and that I was her close friend. Thinking of this freaks me out because I'd generally avoid her if I could at this point. However, her family seemed to know a lot about me in the space of a few weeks. She clearly concocted a story about me to her family. I guess as the weeks went by, she became comfortable and started being more herself. She would sleep all day and be awake during the night. She'd drink up to 3 bottles of whiskey per week, mixing with various medications she was taking. The maid told me all of this as she was cleaning Penny's room. Penny also claimed not to know how old she was. Penny treated the maid very badly. The maid was not allowed to speak to anyone or go out in public or eat properly. She was expected to eat small portions and leftovers. I'd take her out often for a snack or ice cream, which is when she'd tell me about strange Penny. I was told the maid was earning $150 per month, a low wage by Western standards, but normal in this country. Penny included my share of this in my rent, so I was contributing $75 to her salary. I later found out that her wage was only $85, so Penny was knowingly giving this maid $10 a month to work for her full-time, from 10 a.m. to 1 a.m. working hours. She once berated her terribly for going to sleep at 1 a.m. and woke her up demanding she cook for her. Penny reasoned that poor people needed to be kept in check and that they weren't normal people. Penny had a pet dog, who she seemed obsessed with and would spend hundreds of dollars weekly on him. She was paying $10 for her maid and $400 for her dog. In my 5 weeks there, that dog rarely left her bedroom. He would shit all over her bed and piss on her mattress. When she was questioned about the piss stain, she said it was water. It definitely wasn't. I thought she was engaging in bestiality, and that the maid confided that she too thought Penny was indeed engaging in sexual relations with the dog. Her dog would also randomly piss in the common areas, and on one occasion, Penny came out of her room and stood in the piss with her bare feet. She seemed totally unbothered by it. She also claimed the dog could speak to her. Penny would also eat my food often and then deny it, offering the explanation that it could be a ghost. Conversely, she'd claim that she was often starving because she had no access to food, even though she binged daily. I questioned her about my missing food, and she'd scream that she had no idea where it went, and that I shouldn't use the fridge. The fact that she believed in her own delusions seriously freaked me out. She claimed that her friends used to live with her, even though I found no evidence of her ever living with others in that place. She hated for other girls to be described as attractive, as she was severely overweight and never showered. Her hair was knotted as she hadn't washed it in months. She'd also have the maid massage her often. On the occasions that she'd leave her door open, I'd see her sitting in bed gawking at TV and eating or drinking. She also seemed out of breath very often. I had no idea why, because she never did anything active. During my time in that apartment, Penny never left the apartment building once. She just had her routine of sleeping, eating, drinking, and taking pills. She'd often pretend she'd gone somewhere. On a few occasions, she'd turn the lights and TV off in her room and stay silent for a few hours to make me believe she was out. She even made up an elaborate lie that she was taking some exams and pretended to be stressed on the day, even though she never actually had any exams. She seemed to include details in her lies to make them more realistic. It scared me that she did this so naturally. She displayed bouts of mania where she'd spend hundreds of dollars on decorations, like plastic flowers and small figurines, and she'd be up at 5 a.m. decorating the common areas. She did this routine several times. I'd hear her often during the night, pacing back and forth down the hallway in the apartment. She claimed she was decorating the place for all her friends to enjoy, even though no one would come to see her, aside from the cousin. In week 5 of me living there, I heard screaming and shouting one evening. I thought Penny was on the phone, so I ignored it. I then received a hysterical phone call from the maid saying Penny accused her of stealing something and was going to beat her. So she ran to her room. I asked Penny what happened, and she said that the maid had a bad attitude and started crying for no reason. She said she'd just done some difficult exams, not true, had been stressed and wanted to chill, not deal with the rude maid. That night, Penny also severely verbally abused the maid for refusing to come and take more abuse. I heard Penny make a phone call to the maid, in which she screamed the following: "Useless, rude bitch. What are you doing relaxing in your room? I want a drink. Bring it to me now. Useless bitch. I'm ill and I need my drink. I'm too ill to get it myself." Penny was not ill, and the drink in question had been left on the kitchen counter. Penny wanted the maid to deliver it to her in bed. I saw the maid later that night to give her some dinner. Her eyes were red from crying and she was shaking. The same night, the maid told me she wanted to leave the next day because she was sure she'd be severely beaten soon, although she had no idea how to leave, as she was illiterate and relied on Penny's family for her travel arrangement. The maid told me she had called Penny's parents and told them what happened, and they told her not to leave, but she refused. She then said to me, "Her parents don't care about me. Why should I stay? To die? I don't want to die here." She asked that I not leave her alone with Penny until she left. That night I feared for my own safety. I was awoken during the night by Penny slamming doors and running around. She was high and intoxicated, and had likely gone to the maid's bedroom in an attempt to hurt her, although she couldn't gain entry. The next day came, and the maid had packed her 3 bags. Penny's mother rang the maid and instructed her to go and cook lunch for Penny. Penny burst out of her room as soon as she heard her in the kitchen, and all hell broke loose. Penny was screaming and told the maid she was nothing but an uneducated village girl who was not a princess and should never dare to defy her, that she shouldn't even make certain facial expressions in her presence. Penny held the power, and she was going to call the police to come and arrest the maid. She carried on abusing her while I tried to intervene. Of course, Penny wanted to keep the maid working, and had her scrub the floors right up until she needed to leave. Penny said to me, "Can you believe this fucking bitch is trying to leave? Leaving me without a maid." I was both scared and speechless. Before the maid left, Penny insisted on checking the maid's belongings for supposedly stolen items. We went outside the apartment where Penny emptied the maid's 3 bags, including her underwear and food, onto the road, removing various items she claimed were hers. She called the maid a whore, and accused her of fucking around, which is very taboo here. Penny even attempted to take away a gift that I had given the maid. I gave her this gift, as she told me she'd never had a birthday gift in her life. I can only describe it as the denigration of one human by another. Penny's parents kept calling throughout the day, begging the maid to continue living with their daughter. They did this as they heard their daughter's level of disturbing abuse. To execute their plan, they told her they couldn't book her a ticket home, and that she'd have to stay. After she tells them she's being abused. What the fuck? Luckily, and with my help, the maid and I arranged for her fiancé to collect her. I have no doubt she would have severely beaten the maid had I not been present. That day, I decided to move out and left 2 days later, stressed and disturbed from witnessing the above. I hadn't seen Penny since the maid left, as she locked herself in her room. The night before I was leaving, I went to tell her I'd be moving out. I knocked on her door every hour for the whole evening, knowing she was inside. She pretended to be out again and turned her lights off, although I heard her dog barking. The next morning I saw her, and she said that her friends had taken her out to cheer her up after what the maid did to her. She said that she knew I'd been knocking on her door because the dog had panicked and knocked over his water bowl, causing Penny to slip and injure herself when she returned. She had concocted this version of events to tell me. 2 days after leaving, I received a phone call from Penny's mother, who was worried she couldn't contact her daughter. Penny would do this often, as if she wanted her family to think she was dead. I found out that her mother immediately flew into the city, checked whether her daughter was alive or not, then left. In this country, some view mental illness as taboo. So while Penny's family are aware of their daughter's fragile mental state, they do nothing. I assume they enable her because they do not want to deal with her. They allowed her to abuse a vulnerable girl from a poor family in the process, knowing the maid would have no option but to endure abuse. I assume another vulnerable girl has now been sent to live with Penny, and is probably trapped, as the other young girl had been. Penny also continues to advertise her apartment, looking for people to live with. I hope I never see her again, and hope that other prospective housemates see beyond her act of normalcy that she put on when I first met her. Edit. I don't want this story to be taken as a reflection of the country it occurred in. I've only given some country information to provide a little context to the story. This story is primarily about what occurred in that apartment, and should not be taken to suggest otherwise. For this reason, I've omitted the country name. I've also added some additional parts to this story, which I remembered after submission. Edit 2. What happened after I left? Over a week after I moved out, Penny still hadn't returned my deposit. I was calling and texting her daily, and she'd ignore me. She responded once, claiming her friends had taken her to stay with them, as they didn't want her to be alone. Of course, she hadn't left the apartment at all, and was lying again. I know this because the apartment security told me. I woke up one day to around 20 to 25 messages from her, sent in succession, stating that she'd been waiting all week for me to come back, and that I was crazy, and she had been trying to contact me daily. What the fuck? I have no idea why she thought I'd be returning. Finally, a friend of mine arranged to collect my money from her. I couldn't deal anymore. Penny told my friend that I should come at 10 p.m. I do not know what she was planning to do. I notified local police, and I was concerned something may happen. My friend went up to her dark apartment. All lights were off, and she was in there, telling him for an hour how psychotic I was, as if having a conversation with herself, and speaking until she was breathless. She gave him part of my deposit, and told him her friends were coming to pick her up, and that he should leave now. 2. We met rather accidentally 3 weeks ago on Facebook. Yes, I know. One shouldn't add everyone to their friends list. I've learned my lesson. So we had the same hobby, and it turned out we had the same interests. So when he asked me to go out for a coffee, I said yes. We met, and he was a pretty normal guy, for the first 5 minutes. Then he took my hand, which felt strange to me. Where I come from, people have respect for others' personal space. Yeah, I know, those fucking cold Scandinavians. But I considered it normal where I live now. He asked if I felt comfortable with it, and I said no. But he would take my hand over and over again. 10 minutes later, he was following me down the street as I was rushing angrily to the subway and apologizing and almost crying. I felt pity. He seemed to be a nice guy, only without any experience with women. So I decided to still give him a second chance. He was pretty nice, as I said, and we shared common interests. So we went for a walk. He tried to hug me, and when it got clear that I don't want to hug someone I've known for less than 2 hours, he apologized, only to try to grab my ass less than a minute later. I hit him. Ask me why I didn't get away immediately. He apologized again, but did it again soon. I really wanted to shoot him by this time, but said goodbye in the most polite way possible and caught the first subway, even though it was not in my direction. Until then, a pretty unusual story, huh? I wish it would have ended up with me catching the wrong subway and getting home, taking a shower, making dinner, continuing to work on another project. I'm pretty happy to be able to do home office, so I can stay in the flat without needing to go out if I don't want to. Then turning on some music and eventually going to bed. But it was not meant to end up like that. That night he called me. I had no idea how he got my number. I'd never given it to him, nor submitted it on Facebook. I came out with the excuse that I had work to do, and promised to stay in touch, but had it in mind to ignore him. 2 days after it, I was awakened by the doorbell early in the morning. He was standing in front of my door. I have no fucking idea how he got my address. I slammed the door, but he remained there crying, so I came outside to ask him what he wanted. He explained that he had fallen in love, which I dismissed given that he had only met me a couple of days ago and seen me only once. He had sent me some messages which I had read and ignored. I thought he only wanted to sleep with me, but I had found out he suffered from a disorder that did not allow him to have any sexual intercourse. I believe he has a mental disorder as well. So I sent him home and again promised to stay in touch out of pity. And then it began. He would text me all the time, sending over 100 messages per hour. I had to put his number in the reject list of my phone. Every day, I would swear I see him about 50 meters away from me. The guy went so far, he would tell all his friends and relatives I was his girlfriend. He would wait for me to get home from work one day, and take my hand and take me for a walk downtown, holding so tightly that I couldn't get away. He took me to a restaurant, ordered dinner for 2, and didn't stop talking about his plans for us to marry and to visit my family back in Norway. He even knew how our children would be called. I insisted on going to the bathroom. He let me. Then I headed to the bathrooms, but turned left in the last moment and escaped through the back door. Luckily, I had my bag with me and my keys and my phone were in there, so I didn't have to worry he would be able to break into my apartment. This was 3 days ago. Today he stood in front of the house for almost 4 hours, ringing on the doorbell, texting and calling me. Someone let him in the house, unaware of the situation, and he spent another hour in front of my door. He wept, cried, shouted, offended me, apologized, blamed me for ruining his life, declared that I was the love of his life, sang some ballads, threatened to rip me apart, and everything all over again. I sat in the corner, listening and holding a kitchen knife, afraid that he would try to get in. I was in panic. Only after an hour had passed, I got the courage to call the police. When the cops arrived, he had vanished. Yet some hours after they had gone, I saw him down in the garden, but he hid again when he saw my face from the window. He is still there, and I'm afraid. I'm not telling this to creep people out. I just felt the need to share it. 3. A while back, I wanted to get back into the job market after being self-employed for a couple of years. I'm a female and in my late 20s, specializing in journalism and media in a time when magazines are shutting down. Safe to say that the usual question for each interview involved trying to find out if I plan on having kids. But obviously not outright asking, because that is illegal. Although one person actually did. Anyway, I was having a hard time finding anything that wasn't going to take me back to junior level, and feeling pretty bummed out. I started to look for jobs away from the major sites, and more in the classified sections, Craigslist. Mostly just to see what's out there. One day, I spotted an ad for a social media manager, digital marketer, for a company that looked interesting. Something to do with building props for theatre and movie productions. I can do this, I said, and put together a professional proposal and sent off my CV. Got a return email pretty quick, and the guy sounded pretty gruff but assertive. I tried to give him a call, but he wouldn't answer the phone. On email, he was all fine, asking about my credentials. We arranged for a meeting at the warehouse office. On the day, I printed out my proposal, jumped in an Uber, and headed out to the address on his email signature. It was businessy looking. No reason to suspect anything at this point. We start heading out to the super industrial side of town. Again, no big deal. I assume this is because of the warehouse to store the props. I get dropped off at this decrepit looking warehouse at the end of a street. I told the cab not to wait, but seriously regretted it afterwards. The place was empty, and I wanted to walk around the back to see if anyone was there. But the hairs on the back of my neck were up, and I just didn't feel like it was a wise thing to do. I stood out the front with my laptop and my proposal. The time to meet went past 5 minutes. I texted the guy, no response. 20 minutes, I text to no reply. Tried to call multiple times. Then I finally get a text saying, "Hey, where are you?" "I'm here, at the address on your email signature." "Oh, we've moved. I'm in a meeting now, but I'll send one of my boys to come pick you up." At this point, I should have been more freaked out that he was sending a random guy to pick me up, but at the time I was more concerned with how unprofessional this guy was. Call it desperation or rose-colored glasses. I agreed to wait for the guy, but my senses kicked in right after I hung up. What the hell was I doing waiting to get picked up by a random guy to get taken for a meeting at a new location? So odd and bizarre. At this point, I should say that I did ask for a coffee meeting somewhere, but I remember he said he was super busy on a campaign. And anyway, he said I needed to see the warehouse. After a minute, I text him and say, "I'm sorry, I just don't feel comfortable getting into a strange car. Let me know when you're free to reschedule a meeting somewhere between both of us." I go home and relay the story to my husband. Hours later, I get a series of texts that are so incredibly bizarre. I'll retell them as they came through. From him, my name. "I am very disappointed that you didn't turn up to our meeting today, and I expected you to be more professional. Good luck with your career." From me, taken aback because I pride myself on being professional. "I turned up to the address listed for your business on your signature. I was on time. I tried to contact you multiple times after you didn't turn up." I imagine many women would feel uncomfortable getting into a stranger's car. Minutes go by. From him, "I was happy to give you a chance, and you blew it. Going to need all the luck in the world." I was like, what the fuck? Why am I in this bizarre abusive text chain with a potential employer that wouldn't meet me or talk on the phone? So I give up even trying to reason with him. An hour later or so, I, no joke, get a text saying, "By the way, part of your job was to change the email signature to the new address." So, weird potential boss who may or may not have been trying to lure women into his creepy warehouses with the promise of an illustrious social media job. Let's not meet. Sometimes I still wonder if I did something wrong to deserve the abuse from this random. Hey everyone, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to 3 True Scary Stories, episode 95. Well, it's been a miserable day here. Rain, 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 dull skies. Awful. I think the summer might have been and gone. We're having some good weather there, but alas, it has fled. Too bad. I was hoping I should get out in the garden and do some stuff. Okay, that's enough of me grumbling. Let me think, what's planned for the rest of the week? Well, let's see. Tomorrow will be a glitch video. That came together surprisingly quick in terms of stories. Last time I tried to do it, I think I got 1 response back. That's just the way it goes sometimes. Then on Friday, I'm hoping for a paranormal video. It's usually not a problem getting the 5 paranormal stories. We'll see though. And hoping for, but no guarantees, of a TIFU on Saturday. We'll see what I can do. Okay, I think that's about it for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.